History has often favored scale. Today, the scales are beginning to shift. America dropped 14 of the most powerful non-nuclear bombs ever built on Iran's nuclear facilities. The president said they were obliterated. An early Defense Intelligence Agency assessment said the damage may have delayed Iran's nuclear program by only a few months. Less than a year later, America was at war with Iran again. On June 17th, a memorandum was supposed to end it. 21 days later, ships were attacked in the Strait of Hormuz. Washington blamed Iran. America revoked the oil authorization. Trump declared the deal over. Pickaxe Mountain kept being built. And the uranium stockpile, nobody knows where it is. So who won? That's the question everyone asks. But maybe it's the wrong question. Because while the world watched the bombs fall, what did they build?
Every system has an origin. And sometimes, the beginning of a conflict is buried decades before anyone calls it a conflict. In 1957, the United States gave Iran access to civilian nuclear technology through Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace initiative. Years later, Western firms began building the Bushehr nuclear facility. The same nuclear program America would eventually spend decades trying to contain was once a program the West helped build. That's not a moral judgment. It's simply the record. And the record matters. Because infrastructure doesn't forget who built it. It doesn't care when alliances change. It doesn't care when governments change. It doesn't care when yesterday's partner becomes today's adversary. Systems outlive relationships. The relationship between Washington and Tehran eventually collapsed. The incentives changed. The sanctions came. And access to the dominant financial system became a weapon. But something important remained: the infrastructure. And when access disappears, the question becomes, what does a state build when the system it depends on is no longer available to it?
Sanctions are ultimately about access. Access to banks, access to currencies, access to markets, access to the institutions that move money across borders. The theory is simple: restrict access, and eventually the pressure becomes unbearable. But there is another possibility. The system adapts. Iran didn't simply disappear from the global economy. It built around it: shipping companies, exchange houses, front companies, shell companies, different jurisdictions, different currencies, different names. Together, they formed a second economy. In June 2025, the United States Treasury designated a network tied to the Zaring-Halam family: Tehran, Dubai, Hong Kong. A web of companies and financial intermediaries that Treasury said had moved billions of dollars through the international financial system. And that's what makes the story bigger than one family, because this wasn't one secret bank account. It was a network, a system designed with multiple paths. Cut one connection,
the money finds another. That's the nature of resilient networks. They don't survive because every node is protected. They survive because there is no single node you have to destroy. This is why I don't think of this simply as shadow banking. It's something closer to sovereign financial infrastructure, not because every participant is a government employee, but because the network performs a function the formal system no longer provides. Moving capital, settling transactions, maintaining trade, keeping the economy alive outside the reach of the enforcement mechanism. And Iran wasn't the first system to discover that pressure creates incentives for financial innovation. In 2009, Credit Suisse paid $536 million to settle allegations involving transactions connected to sanctioned countries. One technique involved stripping identifying information from payment messages before they moved through the American financial system. The sanctioned country's name could disappear from the message while the transaction continued moving. The important lesson isn't Credit Suisse. It isn't even Iran. It's the architecture. The financial system itself contained pathways around the restrictions imposed upon it. And eventually, Iran's nuclear program reached the point where the financial story became a physical one. On the eve of the Israeli strikes, the IAEA reported that Iran possessed approximately 440.9 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, one technical step below weapons grade. Enough material, if further enriched, for as many as 10 nuclear weapons. The program had survived years of sanctions. It had survived financial isolation. And now it was going to face something much more direct: the bomb.
June 2025. Israel struck Iran. Then, on June 22, the United States launched Operation Midnight Hammer. 7 B-2 stealth bombers, 18 hours from Missouri, 12 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs against Fordo, 2 more bunker buster bombs against Natanz, Tomahawk missiles against surface targets at Isfahan. The declared nuclear infrastructure was severely damaged. The world watched the explosions, the images, the satellite photographs, the craters, the destroyed facilities, and the question seemed simple. Was Iran's nuclear program destroyed? But war has a way of creating questions that are much harder to answer than they appear. Iran had advance warning. Satellite imagery showed activity around the facilities before the strikes. Ventilation shafts at Fordo were covered. Convoys of trucks were seen near tunnel entrances. And then came another problem. After the June 2025 attacks, the inspectors withdrew. Iran suspended cooperation. Full access never returned. Then came February 28, 2026, a second war. By July, the IAEA said it had lost what inspectors call continuity of knowledge over Iran's enriched uranium inventory. In plain English, inspectors could no longer independently verify where all of it was. That does not tell us exactly when every kilogram moved. It does not prove that the entire stockpile was relocated before the strikes, and it does not prove where it is now. It tells us something more uncomfortable. The world could no longer independently account for all of it. You can destroy a facility. You can destroy a centrifuge. You can destroy a building. But you cannot destroy what you cannot locate. 2 kilometers from Natanz, another facility was taking shape. Pickaxe Mountain. Buried roughly 100 meters underground, a facility believed to be beyond the reliable reach of America's existing bunker buster capabilities. Construction continued. It wasn't struck, and IAEA inspectors had never been given access. The declared physical infrastructure had been severely damaged. The financial infrastructure remained. The knowledge remained. And another layer of physical infrastructure was still being built. While the world studied bomb damage assessments, something else was happening hundreds of miles south, something that had almost nothing to do with centrifuges and everything to do with money.
The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important pieces of geography on Earth, a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the wider world. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply and a major share of global LNG trade pass through it. And geography creates leverage. Iran understood that. But what Iran built around that geography was something different: a financial toll booth, a system designed to charge for access through one of the world's most important physical choke points. The proposed toll, $1 per barrel, up to $2 million per vessel. And payment could be made in Chinese yuan or dollar-pegged stablecoins, not through the traditional correspondent banking system, not dependent on the conventional financial rails that sanctions normally target. Picture a crew inside the strait, waiting, $2 million between them and open water, a payment window measured in seconds, a war reduced to routing instructions. The Strait of Hormuz itself had become part of the financial infrastructure. Iran established the Persian Gulf Strait Authority to administer it, a website, a vetting form, a permit process. Then came the insurance layer, Hormuz Safe, not just a toll, a service architecture. The physical choke point was becoming a financial choke point. And that matters because the architecture had changed. The system was no longer simply Iran, banks, money. It was becoming geography, settlement, revenue. The United States could sanction exchanges. Iran could build conversion infrastructure elsewhere. The United States could target off-ramps. Iran could build new ones. The enforcement mechanism could attack individual nodes, but the network could keep adapting. And this is where the story stops being exclusively about Iran. Because the important question isn't, can Iran evade one particular sanction? The important question is, what happens when a state learns how to build financial infrastructure that the dominant financial system cannot easily reach? That's a much bigger question, because now the physical world and the financial world are converging. The strait is physical, the settlement rail is digital, and the transaction can leave the American banking system without leaving the dollar's shadow. That's not simply sanctions evasion, it's a different architecture of power. And every country watching this has to ask itself the same question. What happens if access to the dominant financial system can be replaced? Because if the answer is yes, then financial power doesn't disappear, it fragments. And when power fragments, capital searches for the gaps.
June 17, 2026. The Islamabad Memorandum. It was supposed to end the war. Brokered by Pakistan, signed remotely. No numeric enrichment cap, no present requirement to disclose the location of the uranium stockpile, no automatic snapback clause, no defined consequence if a final agreement never arrived, and even the question of inspections remained contested. The United States said the text was clear. Iran said access depended on the full termination of sanctions. The IAEA Director General described the situation as a war of words. Then something else happened. Capital moved. On June 22nd, OFAC issued a 60-day oil authorization. An illegal door opened. Almost nobody walked through it. No new buyers. China remained. For one brief moment, the architecture looked different. Pressure was becoming access. But access without time isn't really access. Then, 20 days after the memorandum was signed, the oil authorization was revoked. Ships had been attacked in the Strait of Hormuz. Washington blamed Iran. The United States pulled the authorization. On July 8th, Trump declared the memorandum over. Diplomacy had collapsed before Day 61 arrived. But look at what remained. The pathways represented by the Zarang-Halam network, still there. The shadow financial architecture, still there. The IRGC designations, never lifted. Pickaxe Mountain, still under construction. The uranium stockpile, still unverified. And then August came. Pakistan, Qatar, Oman, still trying to revive what Trump had declared dead. The ceasefire disappeared. The oil authorization disappeared. But the memorandum survived. So did the infrastructure.
This is where the story becomes larger than Iran, because Iran isn't the only actor to discover that systems adapt under pressure. The same logic appears again and again. A government restricts access, capital searches for another route. A state loses access to a financial system. It builds another one. A choke point becomes vulnerable, someone builds a bypass. A jurisdiction becomes hostile, capital moves somewhere else. The infrastructure changes, the incentives change, the system survives. But there was one more layer, not nuclear, not financial, not physical. Uncertainty. The uranium no one could locate. The companies designed to obscure who stood behind them. The payment no correspondent bank had to clear. The ship that could not know whether passage required a toll, an escort, or both. Even the agreement meant something different depending on who read it. Iran had not simply built around pressure, it had built uncertainty into the system itself. And uncertainty changed the price of everything. Insurance, oil, diplomacy, war. The bombs destroyed what America could see. The system survived inside everything it couldn't. The war was visible, the adaptation was not. The bombs were visible, the architecture was not. So ask the better question. Not who won, but what did they build while we were watching the bombs fall? And what does it mean that it's still standing?